Has this ever happened to you? Then tell me immediately. I want to know. Welcome to the Heavy Weapons Guide, where I'll be going through some of the most popular maps in Team Fortress 2 and show you how to succeed at them as Heavy Weapons Guy. I was surprised to see there wasn't anything out there like this already. I mean, there's plenty of resources for playing maps in general or guides specific to other classes, but I couldn't find anything specifically tailored to Heavy and his gameplay. It's funny that the class that prides himself on positioning to work has nothing specifically made for him, but that's what this guide's all about, especially considering the map I'm choosing to talk about today. That being PL Upward. Upward is one of the most popular payload maps for casual and competitive play, but also is notorious for being sniper heaven. I've heard many people talk about their struggles playing this map as Heavy because of the sniper's presence alone, but also asking the question of, where is it safe to stand so he doesn't kill me and still lets me help my team? And I thought this guide could kill two birds with one stone in that case. The first of which being the key positions to control is both an offense and a defense Heavy, which has some overlap due to Heavy's typical playstyle. And the second being common sniper positions, so you have a general idea of where they might be standing and how to avoid them. As a disclaimer, this may or may not be relevant to any current competitive players. It's been a few years since I last played competitive Team Fortress 2 in any serious capacity, and some of that knowledge is included here, but could be dated. This guide is mainly to focus on the map-specific things Heavy can do on Upward, rather than the tips and tricks about improving your gameplay across the board. With that all out of the way, I'll get started with talking about offense as Heavy. The first thing I want to talk about are loadouts. It's important that your loadout contributes to your success rather than holds you back. In this case, your choice of minigun should be pretty much anything except the Brass Beast, since speed is the name of the game and it has pretty limited uses beyond defense. As much as I love the weapon, I can't recommend using it for most of the offense. Generally, the best secondaries to use would be the lunchboxes, particularly the sandwich. While something like the locust bar or the second banana can be useful for the recurring supply of health, I recommend using the sandwich because of the numerous small health packs across the map that you can upgrade. And these things are all over the place. Upgrading is when you throw down your sandwich, then pick up a health pack while at full health, as that refills your lunchbox immediately. This means you can turn a small health pack into a medium health pack. As for your melee weapon, it's a close tie between the speed melees, those being the gloves of running urgently or the eviction notice, and the fists of steel. While going fast as Heavy is helpful, I think the Fists of Steel come out on top, purely because they allow you to survive a fully charged headshot from a non-Machina sniper. The ability to cross a sightline almost guaranteed means you'll have a lot more wiggle room compared to using other melee options. The Fists of Steel also let you push the cart through sightlines and spam without any problems. The only way enemies can really stop you from doing this is by getting close and meleeing you off the cart. As for the other non-melee unlocks, there's plenty of positions where they can be useful, and I'll mention those as they come up. Ultimately, the choice is yours with whatever loadout you want to use. Feel free to experiment with different combinations of stuff to see what works best for your playstyle. Before I talk about any specific strategies for offense, there's two things I want to go over. The first is that every match will be different, so adapting to the playstyles of your teammates and your enemies is important to winning the game. The same strategy isn't going to work every single time. The second thing is to recognize what about your offense isn't working. If you're failing to get through a choke point or something because a demo man keeps trapping it, you might need to approach from a different route to coordinate with your team to deal with him instead. Most of the time people lose on offense is because they don't change up their strategy and try something different. Now for some specific to Upward stuff. I'm going to cover different strategies and approaches you can have to Upward that go beyond playing cart heavy. There's so much more you can do for your team than just pushing the cart. For starters, it's important to rotate and attack from different sides as Heavy. Too many routes are sightlines, and avoiding those as much as possible means you aren't going to die to sniper as much. You have such a major advantage when attacking from anywhere that isn't from the front, as that's the last place people expect to see you. Speaking of which, stay with your team. Many of the points aren't easy to push as Heavy unless enemies aren't paying attention or they're careless, so working with others to get through those spots are how you win the map. Make sure you also communicate with your teammates if you plan on going through a flank and you want them to support you. It's called Team Fortress 2, and playing with your teammates is where Heavy shines the most. The most important part of your offense is to play off of your momentum. Upward allows for easy snowballing if you take the first point, as taking positions on all the consecutive points means you're fighting the red team sooner than they can set up. This is where using one of the speed melees helps you keep up with the rest of your team while running to the next point. Doing all three of these are key to winning offense consistently and decisively as heavy, even on this sniper playground of a map. Alright, that's all the general stuff. Now I'm going to go through each point as if you were actually playing a game of Upward and talk you through the specifics. As setup time begins, you're welcome to mess around and spawn. It's not like you have anything to prepare before the game starts. If you want to do something productive, you can look out your spawn doors to check for sticky traps, see where the enemy snipers are, and get a general idea of where enemies will be positioned. Some of the common sniper positions to look out for are on top of the house, around this rock by the cliff, or if your team pushes forwards a bit, snipers will stand somewhere on the hill or by the doorway by the tunnel. They can also use different positions than these, so you'll have to pay attention to where they are, but these are the most common ones and you should respect these sightlines regardless. That goes for all the other common sightlines on this map, unless you want to give the sniper the big metal middle finger with your fists of steel. Out of the three ways to leave spawn, the left side door is the best. The center and right side doors are both in the same sniper sightline from the house and are where the red team will be mainly focused. Neither of these doors give you any positional advantage if enemies are holding on the high ground or by the cliff. In comparison, the left side door is a straight shot to the top of the stairs, where the defending team is usually standing. This also isn't easily seen from a sniper standing on the house. Regardless of whichever door you use, make sure to spy check everything and anything outside your spawn. A spy might go for a stab on someone pushing the cart or attacking their team, but doing this prevents that from happening. It also might save your skin from a spy who might have killed you otherwise. Sticky traps are another thing to look out for due to the map's weird geometry and props all around your spawn. Many of the wooden walls have places to hide stickies from the front, and many rocks and bushes on the ground are cosmetic and can obscure them easily. Just check everything along the path you take to save you and your teammates from a stealthy trap. Likewise, you can shoot through the holes in the scaffolding as well. As you get closer towards the house, you'll need to decide where to attack the enemy team from. If you're getting Ubered into the enemy team, I suggest going from either the stairs or the tracks. Going from the stairs means you'll have a chance to see what's in front of you before you get too close, and going from the tracks means you'll be close enough to enemies before they see you coming. You'll want to focus on destroying any engineer buildings and forcing enemies to move back. If you can destroy the teleporter too, that means there's no reinforcements coming from the red spawn. That's assuming you kill the engineer as well. If you kill a lot of enemies or just force them out of this position, you want to keep hold of it. This helps create space for teammates to push the cart safely and without worrying about a counter push. If you wanted to try something cheeky, you can go along the cliffside for an attack from behind. This will put you in the middle of the enemy team and can let you draw attention to their backline instead of what's going on in the front. I don't recommend attacking from back here unless you're coordinating with teammates at the front, or you can use an Uber into them. There's also this jump you can do off this rock to get onto the roof of the house. You don't need any of the speed melees to make this jump either, so you can do it with the Fists of Steel. I like doing this jump when they don't have anyone on the roof, as that means I can just drop down on them and they won't expect it. That's all for positioning for this point. As for some weapons you can use as alternatives to stock, I'd say the Tomislav is a good call because the accuracy bonus lets you fight enemies at longer ranges. That's always helpful on these longer kinds of points. And the Hulong heater can also be great if you're attacking from the tracks or doing the rock jump, so you can light people on fire and shoot them at the same time. Overall, the first point is rather straightforward, with the biggest issue being to watch out for snipers that are standing on the house or by the rock. Although, as you get closer, they're forced to retreat back behind their team, which allows you to aggress on their teammates without worrying about them as much. That's all for first. Now on to the second point. One of the first things you'll notice when pushing the second point is that your spawn hasn't changed. With how much further the cart is getting from the beginning, it might be a good idea to equip one of the speed melees to reduce how punishing dying can be here. This also helps if your engineer is struggling to keep a teleporter up, or just doesn't exist. You might respawn faster than on defense, but you still have to make this long walk back. While you're walking back, you'll need to be wary of the sniper positions, which is pretty much the entire territory by the capture point. It extends from the house called Playground all the way towards the red spawn. A sniper having this much sight allows them to cover almost the entire left side of the hill and the last half of the tunnel, so approach those areas with caution. The Fists of Steel can do a lot of work here in allowing you to cross the hill without worrying too much about them. There's only 2 routes you can go after first, which is either through the tunnel or going over the hill. The hill gives you a much stronger positional advantage compared to the tunnel, but is very dangerous not only due to the sniper sightlines, but also the distance. Other power classes will have enough time and space to either run from you coming up the hill, or dive into you if you're not ready for them. There's also this jump you can do from the left side of the tunnel that lets you get to the doorway. If you manage to get up the hill safely, I like to hold by this rock wall and take a position here. Doing this helps create a safer place for teammates until we try pushing forward the rest of the way, and it also means I won't be dying to snipers unless they're specifically looking for me when I poke around the corners. As for pushing in the tunnel, this is a cart-heavy route and is actually decent for getting closer to the point safely. The only things you need to watch out for are enemies actually holding in the tunnel, who are usually standing on the high ground, any snipers standing on the house in the far back, and any spies. I'd say this isn't usually an issue due to controlling the hill being the bigger priority for the defensive team, so getting the cart into and through the tunnel isn't really hard, getting it out is the problem. What I try to do when the game is stalemating a bit, like if we can't push up the hill that much, is to get the cart as close to the exit of the tunnel as possible. What this does is when we do eventually break the defense and get over the hill, teammates and I don't have to spend as much time pushing the cart the rest of the way through the tunnel. Getting this cap time sooner helps save time later. The tunnel also gives you 2 alternative routes instead of just following the cart, those being the spiral tunnel leading to the hill and the lower cliffside flank leading to the house. The spiral tunnel is one of the few universally great positions for heavy, since it provides cover for you to push into enemies on the hill or keep low ground enemies from coming up. This also allows you to bypass the sniper sightlines without making yourself too obvious. The lower cliffside is similar to the previous one from the first point, except you can be air blasted off and you're a bit more obvious when approaching. While this can allow you to harass engineer buildings on the porch or maybe kill some snipers standing on the house, it simply isn't worth it unless your teammates are already controlling the hill. Drawing this kind of attention this far in the backline means enemies will turn around and kill you instead, and there's no escape for you. What is worth doing is attacking from the hillside once you get there, as this is the easiest part of Upward as heavy. All you have to do once you get to the balcony is to jump down into the enemy team, preferably with Uber. This balcony gives you cover, the high ground, and an easy escape route you can use if enemies want to come up the hill. The only real threats to you from here are snipers and spies. Before you drop in, it's worth seeing how much harassment you can do, as engineer buildings and enemies getting closer to the point are both easy pickings. When you actually drop in, you'll want to focus on any pyros and sentry guns due to their knockback being able to send you over the cliff behind you. Some of the weapons you can use for the second point are the Hulong Heater and the Brass Beast. They both excel in drop-down situations and don't require you to be mobile to be effective in close quarters combat. There aren't many health packs on this point, so running the Sandwich is still a good idea to upgrade any small packs you find. The 1 or 2 medium packs that exist are too far out of the way for you, so they may as well not even exist. Okay, that's the second point then. It's rough to push without an engineer or a team that sticks together, but can also be a breeze if your team is on the hill before enemies are even ready. This point is kind of the difficulty spike of the map, where it's the hardest to play heavy, but means things gets a lot easier once it's capped. Third point is where your spawn finally moves up into the tunnel, which is a godsend since you don't have to keep walking from the first point anymore. This means you won't need to worry about speed melees as much, but they're still really nice to have if they don't have a sniper standing in the front. Speaking of which, the main sniper spots are anywhere along the tracks or on this red balcony. This is also the point where you'll see snipers standing in that spot all the time. You already know the one I mean, that wooden platform by the point that lets him see all the way back to second. If you see him standing out there, I wouldn't even bother and let your teammates deal with it instead. That particular spot and anywhere close to the cart are the more aggressive positions, with further down the tracks being the passive positions. These coincide with the aggressive and passive holds defending teams may do.
If enemies are holding aggressively, they'll be controlling the main routes heading to the capture point itself and preventing your team from coming up the hill at all. You should expect to see a sentry or two as well as the entire red team in the front line standing by the tracks. This also means enemies might be set up in the old red spawn, so you'll have to keep your eyes out for that too. This makes going with the cart pretty dangerous, even with the Fists of Steel. They might stop the snipers, but enemies have the high ground and proximity to attack you without letting you escape. Similar to on the second point, I like to push the cart as far as I can up the slopes before retreating back to my team. This takes a very long time to do by yourself, so I don't suggest doing it unless it's a last minute kind of thing. As for breaking an aggressive defense, I'd recommend going through the old red spawn room. It gives you the option of going from either a low or high ground position, which both have their own unique benefits. The low ground is the fastest and most direct route for when you have an opening, but it's completely garbage when red is established since they'll have teammates on the balcony and standing by the tracks. While heavy is great at getting enemies off the balcony, you're gonna get shredded in this position without Uber, and even then, enemies can run for cover or air blast you down the hill before you get close enough to do anything. That's when going the high ground is the better option. It gives you even footing with the balcony and lets you get forward on the tracks without being at a positional disadvantage. Snipers can have a sightline on this route, but you can just use the Fist of Steel in cover to close the distance on them, or retreat if you need to. I personally like going this way when Ubering into the enemy team. The main position you want to take control of on this point is the balcony where the red team holds. Standing here allows you to watch both the tracks and the red forward spawn door. There's no sightline on this spot unless you walk out by the tracks, and enemies will have a hard time pushing into you unless they're holding passively, in which case their whole team will be set up by their spawn. Holding on the balcony is just to make space for your teammates to either come forward or help push the cart safely. You don't want to push too far ahead though, as their forward spawn doesn't close until the point's captured. If enemies are holding passively, that means they'll be by their forward spawn and anywhere else behind that on the tracks. The engineer buildings will be watching the doorways rather than the hill, with enemies only advancing to attack the cart when it's going up the last slope. Getting onto the balcony should be pretty straightforward since no one's going to be shooting you until you round the corner, so that's basically free territory. It means you have to be ready for enemies coming towards the cart as it gets closer though. The alternative route I like to use when enemies hold passively is the pathway under the tracks. It's a free pass around the sniper sightlines, and the only issues are when you're walking along the catwalks towards the shithouse. Yes, it's actually called shithouse, as that's where you can be blasted off the edge if they move to play aggressively. From shithouse, you can either harass enemies from getting closer to your teammates on the cart, or you can take an Uber through to secure a forward position on the red spawn. The trade-off is that you won't have a safe escape route because of the death pit behind you if enemies decide to come attack you. Probably the best weapon to use for pushing this route and this entire point would be the Tomislav. The accuracy bonus makes sieging a lot easier, and the silent rev makes coming from shithouse much stronger. Something I like to do for pushing during a stalemate is using one of the shotguns. Many people seem to regard these as either straight up awful weapons or only meme tools for Fat Scout, but actually using them in tandem with your minigun is great. For this point specifically, I like using them when I'm aggressing from the low ground towards enemies, since I don't have to stop and rev before I can start shooting people. Committing to a bad position is an easy way to die as heavy. I'd recommend either stock or the family business, as the panic attack stops being effective past about 300 hammer units or so. The sandwich is still great here too, since the small health pack in the old red spawn can be upgraded, and no other packs are around by the tracks, or the high ground, or the balcony. This point doesn't really have a lot of health packs. That wraps up the third point. You've got plenty of different routes to approach from depending on how the enemy team is playing, but you have to be willing to make adjustments so you can help your team the most. Before talking about upward last, I want to emphasize the importance of not overextending when pushing the third point. What I see a lot of people do is push towards the red spawn as the third point is being captured. The issue with this is that it's basically impossible to keep the enemy team held back long enough for the cart to travel the full distance between third and last. If you die at any time during that push, the enemy team will have time to set up and stop the cart at the choke point, which kills all of your momentum from third. What you want to do is to help the cart get closer before going into the last point, even if you capture third really quick, as staggering your momentum instead of going all in can help you win the game. Compared to the rest of the map, the last point of Upward is a blessing in disguise for Heavy. It's the most standard point on the map, and that's to your benefit. The sniper sightlines aren't enormous, there's lots of CQC opportunities, and the only major issue is the verticality, which is manageable on offense compared to defense. That's not an excuse to be throwing your life away constantly, because the longer you're alive, the more time you can spend helping your team and drawing enemies' attention while you're attacking. Your spawn is also moved into the old red spawn, and not that long of a walk from the action. For the defending snipers, they usually stand under the crates balcony or anywhere by their spawn, either by the staircase or on the high ground. They can be rather hard to see because of how dark the corners can be, but avoiding any sightline with the red spawn basically means you're okay. There are plenty of routes that only pass by these positions briefly, so using the Fist of Steel isn't as necessary, especially because snipers sometimes get tunnel vision on the main choke point. To break the last point, you'll want to take control of the apartments and the stairwell room. Apartments refers to the entire upper section of last, and the stairwell room is this room with the large health pack at the bottom. Controlling the apartments gives you and your team more places to attack from and forces the enemy team to stand further back from the choke point and the final slope. The fastest way up to apartments is from the stairwell room, as you can easily walk in there after taking the third point. You'll only need to watch out for enemies already in there and anyone who's watching outside the windows. If there are enemies already standing up there, you can walk through under and take the stairs up behind them. Getting upstairs into enemy-occupied apartments as heavy is very difficult without Uber, so teammates should be the ones to open up that space for you if you're struggling to get in by yourself. Once you're in, you'll want to make sure enemies don't come in from the staircase or the windows. There will most likely be a sniper or two and a sentry trying to shoot at you, so play it safe and make sure you're not poking out the windows too often. When you see an opening, you should take shots at enemies on the low ground or any sentries you see, as some places up here allow you to outrange them. Sentries in the pub spot might have an engineer actively watching them, so be careful if he's healing the sentry or using the Wrangler. You can also do this from the crates balcony, but this limits your escape routes to the doorway you used to get here. This also gives you the opportunity to drop down and kill the snipers yourself after they've been tearing into you the rest of the map.
Sniper! Fuck you!
Dramatization may not have happened.
Pushing through the main choke point is risky if the enemy team has set up, even with the payload's healing and cover. You're walking into a sniper sightline, a sentry gun or two, and whatever the defending team has standing to the left of the choke point. Even with an Uber charge, this position is dubious due to how little positional advantage you gain once your Uber fades. The one good thing you can do from here is attack a sentry from the pub spot if it's placed improperly, as the angle favors you. If you're dead set on pushing through main, the best strategy would be to kill the enemies standing to the left of the choke point with an Uber, ideally making space for your teammates to push in afterwards. The problem with doing this is that their spawn is so close, and unless you kill anyone, they can simply retreat, resupply, and attack from another angle. In short, Ubering through main isn't worth it unless you kill almost everyone by the choke point. The last route you can utilize is under. I only go this way to get cheeky kills on snipers or harass people in the choke point who aren't paying attention behind them. But it can work as a decent position when your team is pushing the last slope. Enemies will either go on the right side path or drop down from the pub spot above you and won't see you until it's too late. Unless you're at this point of the game, standing here means you'll be air blasted into the pit or killed by any snipers standing by their spawn. Once the cart starts going up the slope, the enemy team will be throwing bodies and projectiles at it to stop. This is where you'll need to keep enemies focused on you outside of their spawn rather than the cart. I try to focus on blocking the lower red spawn doors and the right side path so enemies walking out of spawn are forced to deal with me or die. This is primarily to stop them from body blocking the cart. Alternatively, if you're the one pushing the cart up the slope, I'd say to use your minigun to keep enemies away, as pulling out your Fists of Steel gives time for pyros and jumping classes to close the distance and stop you from pushing. Speaking of miniguns, this is another point where both the Brass Beast and the Hulong Heater are exceptional, so long as you control apartments first so you can drop in on people. I also like using the Tomislav here since the accuracy bonus makes sniping from apartments a lot easier when enemies are distracted. Secondary-wise, there are a lot of health packs on the last point compared to the rest of the map, so I'd say anything goes really. I personally like using one of the shotguns since there's a lot of CQC in apartments and I don't always have time to rev up first. That's everything for pushing last. Make sure you control the high ground and keep the enemy team on the back foot so the cart can go up the last slope smoothly and end the game. And that's all for offense. The main things to do are to keep up your momentum when pushing, making space for your team, and not playing in the sniper sightlines unless absolutely necessary. I'm gonna save talking about defense for another video since I'm not happy with where it's at right now. If you thought I should have mentioned something else for offense, or if I said something that was incredibly stupid, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Later, skater.